Queen because of that.
So familiar and yet so totally unknowable, Hugo. This famous phrase, not letting daylight in upon the magic. It's she has lived by that, hasn't she?
Yes, she has. I mean, by not expressing her views in public, of course, she's perfectly capable of expressing them in private, and by and large, people have respected that. I think sort of the Commonwealth thing you were just mentioning is terribly interesting. She was called as a family of nations, and they, in a way, what she's witnessed and helped is a sort of change from, as it were, empire to a group of countries that like to come together for trade, for sport and all those things. It is terribly, terribly important. The other thing which I think you'll find in the course of her reign is that, and I don't know how long it took me to realise this, that she's a tremendous conciliator. She's been a great one, even from the early part of the reign, for saying things like, well, we cannot change the past, but we can build bridges to the future.
Chris?
Yes, I completely agree with you that you know, I think the country, the reason why there's been this sort of outpouring of affection for the Queen following the announcement from Buckingham Palace today is because of the, you know, the service that she's given and everything that she has done for this country over so many years, 70 years, as we celebrated only a few weeks ago.
Yes, and generations have come and gone, and they might have from time to time thought, well, this Jubilee won't be as popular as the last one, but every year people turn out, every time there's a landmark
I think
occasion.
that's right. And if you talk to people in the palaces, they say exactly that. They're always worried about the Jubilee. Will people come? Well, I know for myself, I was there on the Mall when it happened. People did come and people did celebrate in the way that they did.
All right, Chris and Hugo, thank you. And I'm afraid to say in the last few moments, the following statement has been released. It reads, I will find that statement for you. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. So let's take a moment to reflect on that news. So let me just now repeat that statement from the royal household, which we have received in the last few minutes. It reads, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And so the reign of Elizabeth II comes to a close after 70 years at the age of 96. Her son Charles is now king. For most of us, she has been the only monarch we have ever known. Her reign has been the longest and, in the view of many, one of the most successful in British history. Since her coronation in 1953, the young woman who became our Queen at just 25 years of age set the standard by which future monarchs will be judged. She protected and she preserved the institution of the monarchy in turbulent times while shaping it for the future. A life devoted to public service that has endeared her to people both here, across the wider Commonwealth and indeed the world. And we will continue our live programming to reflect on the Queen's remarkable 70-year reign as we enter a new era under the new King. And our Royal Editor Chris Shipp joins me now. First reaction, Chris.
Mary, we have been talking this afternoon about the significant statement from Buckingham Palace at lunchtime today. I think this was the news that everyone dreaded, but the news that came just in the last few moments, a very short statement that she died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. We now have a king and a queen consort who will remain at Balmoral. We are talking, Mary, about an extraordinary life, and this is a very somber moment for the nation. We are reflecting on someone who was head of state for 70 years, for 7 decades, and at this moment we are all witnesses to history. Most people who live in this country can remember no other head of state, no other monarch other than Queen Elizabeth II. As we have been discussing, she was working until the very end. Only 2 days ago, there at Balmoral Castle in the drawing room, the pictures of the Queen meeting her 15th Prime Minister. This is a live shot of Buckingham Palace where the Union flag has been lowered to half-mast. Now, at every royal residence, the flag will be lowered to half-mast, apart from at Balmoral, where the King's standard will still be flown at the top of the mast. It's difficult. There we have Downing Street again, the flags at half-mast. Now, flags will stay in this position for the next 10 or 11 days and will only be raised again the day after the Queen's funeral. Mourning will take place for that period of time. Royal mourning, however, Mary, will continue for about a month. We were seeing pictures just 2 days ago of the Queen working until the very end. The Queen meeting her 15th Prime Minister, Liz Truss, from whom we will expect a statement in the next few moments. And a year when the country was celebrating the 70-year reign of the Queen, the Platinum Jubilee, when tens of thousands of people turned out to show their appreciation over the long Jubilee weekend. But we now have a king. We are presuming he will reign as King Charles, but we will wait for an announcement from Buckingham Palace. And the king at the moment remains at Balmoral.
Chris, it is a moment in history, isn't it? The end of a life of service and duty to crown and country.
I mean, she had this role as head of state. She also had a very important role as head of a nation, and in that it was someone around whom national identity has been formed, Mary. And I think many people identify as British in part because of the Queen and the role that she has played over the last 7 decades. Just think about those balcony appearances at Buckingham Palace. They were always national moments. They were always moments that brought the nation together. We most recently saw that in June. This was after trooping the colour in June, when, whether you're a passionate supporter of the monarchy or not, her appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace was always a moment for the country to come together. Think also all the way back to her coronation in 1953, the first to be fully televised, and made her the focus of not just a national celebration and national pride, but, you know, an international focus for the Queen and for this country at a time when Britain was still reeling from the effects of the Second World War. We now will have another coronation in due course. When we speak about historic moments, we will have to have a coronation for the new king, which is what Prince Charles became at the moment of his mother's death. We presume he will reign as King Charles, but we await for that confirmation. I mean, and that alone is a moment of significant change for the country, change to the national anthem, change to who politicians and members of the military swear their allegiance.
Chris, as monarch, she held so many roles, didn't she? Not just in this country, but right around the world. She was a truly international figure.
And that, I think, is why this is an international story. This is an international news story, not just in the countries where she remains the head of state, be that Canada or Australia or New Zealand or Jamaica or Belize. It's an international news story because this was one of the most famous people, perhaps even the most famous person in the world. And we should acknowledge what a huge presence she had on the stage. We talk about the Commonwealth, an organisation that meant so much to the Queen, an organisation that was in its infancy when she became our monarch in 1952 and now has 54 member states, 2 new ones recently, making it up to 56. The Queen was head of the Commonwealth, and I think diplomatically, here is someone who used the crown to great effect on the international stage without, and this is a crucial point, without ever straying into the political sphere.
It was an enormous art, wasn't it? And throughout that time and until the last year, little more of her life, she did so, of course, with Prince Philip at her side, her consort, her strength and stay, as she called him.
Yes, and I think, as we have been discussing, we have witnessed a diminished figure since the passing of her beloved husband, to whom she was married for 73 years, and they reigned together. We are talking about the second Elizabethan era, but that was a reign that she shared for most of that time with her beloved husband. They saw the world together and they saw that world change together. And I think most people will agree, he was the consort. They reigned together, and it's a testament to the legacy that they both leave behind, that they managed to keep the monarchy relevant throughout all those 7 decades. And of course, when Prince Philip died last year, many will remember the pictures of the Queen sitting alone at his funeral because of the COVID restrictions in place at the time in St George's Chapel, as elsewhere. And she has spent her last months, a little over a year, as a widow queen. And I think many people will agree she found that very difficult because she was used to having her support, her consort by her sides throughout that whole time.
Chris, what happens now?
What happens now is that we have a king and we have a major constitutional change in this country. We will expect to hear from the king at some point. Given the timing of this announcement, we don't know when that will be, but we know they're staying in Balmoral. It's likely that something might happen in London tomorrow, but we will hear from the Queen, and we will shortly hear from the Prime Minister, the Queen's 15th Prime Minister, and she's only been in place for 2 days, and we expect to hear from her very shortly. None
of this happens without an enormous amount of planning. It is the passing of an elderly, very much loved mother, grandmother, but she was the monarch. And so everything that happens over the next few days will have been very carefully planned, won't it? Nothing will happen by accident or as a surprise. So what can we expect, do you think, to see? There is a sequence of events which will now move into place. As you rightly say, they are events that have been long planned. However, we have always been told that they are never certain until the king himself has signed them off. That sequence of events is slightly altered because the death of the monarch happened in Scotland. Therefore, there will be a different set of circumstances. We are expecting the coffin to remain at
Balmoral Castle, where the Queen died, perhaps for the next day or so, and then it will move to the Scottish capital, Edinburgh, where the coffin will go to the Palace of Holyrood House. That is the Queen's official residence in Scotland. And then there will be a moment when the people of Scotland can pay their respects to the Queen at St Giles Cathedral on the High Street in Edinburgh. All of these things will now slowly fall into place, but it all requires the King to sign them off. And that is a process that will be going underway at the castle right now.
And this cannot be unexpected in terms of the palace arrangements, but there is a great deal that we do not know yet, do we? We don't even know what the new king will call himself.
No, we know that we have a new king and we know that we now have a queen consort. Let's be clear, we haven't had a king and queen consort since February 1952. And this in itself is a significant change. Here is a rainbow which has just in vision appeared over Windsor Castle, where you can see on top of the round tower there the Union flag also flying at half-mast. Windsor was a place the Queen loved, a place where she loved to be and where she spent many of her final months. But Balmoral was also so close to her heart, and that was the place where we now know she passed this afternoon. So a sequence of events will now fall into place, and that will involve staff at Balmoral. Don't forget, staff are very closely attached to the person that they have served for so long, and it will be for the staff at Balmoral first to pay their respects to the Queen, and we expect the coffin in due course to be moved to the ballroom at Balmoral, where members of staff on the estate there will be able to pay their tributes. But you can see here pictures from Buckingham Palace, and I think if you just look in the corner there, Mary, you can see them bringing out the official notification that is going to go onto the railings. That is the notice of the Queen's passing. We'll get a closer look of it imminently, but you can see many crowds have gathered around there, and this is a very traditional way in which to announce the passing of a monarch, a notice on the railings of Buckingham Palace, which you can see going up right this very moment.
And that statement will be precisely what we read just a few minutes ago. It'll be reiterated in the same format. So in case anyone is just joining us, a statement that has come from the royal household, which we received about 20 minutes ago or so. And it goes as follows. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. So what happens when they return to London tomorrow, Chris?
Again, it will be for the King to sign off this plan, but we are expecting him to make a televised address to the nation. He knows better than anyone else how much his mother was loved and respected, not just in this country, but around the world. But we are also talking about a man, the former Prince of Wales, who is now King, who knew the affection with which his mother was held, but also who has a personal loss. He is suffering a personal grievance. He, this afternoon, has lost his mother, and viewers might know, if they've been watching us for the last hour or so, will know that at Balmoral Castle at the moment, Prince Charles, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward, all of the King's 4 children, along with Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, and we are expecting Prince Harry to arrive as well, although we don't know whether or not he was able to get there in time to see his grandmother, with whom he was very close, despite all the things that have happened in recent months.
So a very, very sad day for the family, but a very sad day, I think, for the country. But even those who aren't particular fans of the monarchy as an institution, I think would agree that they have huge respect and often great affection for the Queen.
Unbelievably so, yes. Whether or not you support monarchy or you would rather Britain had an elected head of state, I think everyone will be united in the belief and the realisation that this Queen did this job for so many years and gave her life to the role that she inherited, and of course inherited unexpectedly, because her father, King George VI, was the second son of King George V, and were it not for the abdication crisis of 1936, it might be an entirely different set of circumstances that we are talking about. I do understand that the process by which things will now happen, the movement of the coffin, the speech from His Majesty the King, will likely be pushed back slightly because of the late timing of the announcement of the Queen's death this afternoon.
There are many statements now appearing from people who all want to express their sadness, and one of them I picked out is J.K. Rowling, the writer, of course, Harry Potter writer, who talks about the Queen having been a thread winding through all our lives, and I think it's a very accurate sentiment, really, isn't it? Because she was a constant for 70 years. None of us really have known life without her.
And I think that is. We were saying in the last hour, this is such a significant change because this is what we have all known, or at least anyone born after 1952, it is all we have ever known. It's this Queen, it is this monarch who has been there throughout. A changing country, a changing world, but this monarch has been there throughout. So we are now looking to the future of our monarchy with a king, with King Charles, a man who was the Prince of Wales for about as long as it's possibly to be, the longest in history. And interestingly, not only has he become king this afternoon, but Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, is now the Duke of Cornwall and Cambridge. He's not yet the Prince of Wales, which is the traditional title given to the heir to the throne. That will come in due course.
Is that inevitable? Will he?
Yes, that's inevitable. Yeah. Every king was previously the Prince of Wales. That was the case for even King Edward VIII. And all those who came before him. But right now, Prince William and Kate are the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge, because they have inherited the Dukedom of Cornwall, which was created to provide an income and an estate for the heir to the throne, which is what Prince William now is. His father is King, Camilla is Queen Consort. And that is a significant set of changes.
Yes, it is. But in the fact that she has become Queen Consort, that in itself was unthinkable even a few years ago. But the Queen made sure that that was going to be in place.
The Queen put all these things in place in the last few months. In fact, the announcement about Camilla being the Queen Consort was made by the Queen herself on Accession Day on February the 6th, the day that she marks the passing of her own father, and still did, even though it was 70 years before. And this year, on Accession Day, when she officially marked her Platinum Jubilee, she said that when the time comes, and that time has now come, she would like her son's wife to be known as the Queen Consort. So we now have King Charles, we wait for confirmation, and Queen Camilla, who is not a Queen Regnant, but she is a Queen Consort. And
explain the difference, if you would.
She's not a queen by birth, she is a queen by marriage, in the same way that Prince Philip was a consort to Queen Elizabeth II. Camilla is now Queen Consort to King Charles, if that's the name he decides to take, in the same way that Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, people will remember, was the consort to King George VI. That is the position that we now have following the passing of Her Majesty the Queen this afternoon.
It is a fascinating. I mean, it is a very sad day, and I think many people in this country and around the world will be deeply saddened by what's happened today. But it is also an enormous event in terms of our country, in terms of the changes that will now happen, and perhaps even in terms of the way that we're seen internationally, because she was such an international figure, wasn't she?
You're right. This is a moment of significant change for the nation. It's a significant change on the world stage, and I think actually of the images that we saw of the Queen at the G7 summit that was held in Cornwall very recently, when she was the focal point. There were presidents and prime ministers from the biggest economies of the world, and yet she was the focus. She was the one that everyone looked up to and respected, and tributes will be coming in around the world far and wide. In fact, they were coming in this afternoon, and you can see there in Downing Street the The lectern has been placed, a lectern that was only put up 2 days ago after Liz Truss went to see the Queen to be appointed her 15th Prime Minister. That lectern is now up for entirely different reasons, not to mark the start of Liz Truss's premiership, but to mark the end of the Queen's reign as Queen Elizabeth II after 70 years.
And as you say, that was only a couple of days ago that Liz Truss was making her debut speech as Prime Minister. So that, what I think will become a very famous photograph of Liz Truss being received by the Queen at Balmoral, will have been the final photograph of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes, you're right. And actually, I was struck, and I think let's see if we can find that photograph of the Queen in the drawing room at Balmoral Castle now, because I was struck even yesterday, before we knew about any decline in the Queen's health over the last 2 days. Let's think, we're talking about 2 days here since Liz Truss and met the Prime Minister and Boris Johnson resigns. I mean, these are 2 days, and in that time, this was the Queen's final duty. One was to ask Liz Truss to form an administration. The other was to issue just yesterday, to issue a statement expressing her condolences to the people of Canada for the attacks in Saskatchewan. So, I mean, people will talk about how this Queen did her duty right to the very end, right until 2 days before her death. This was happening at Balmoral Castle. It
is remarkable, and when you think of the changes that she's seen, as we've already said, Winston Churchill, her first Prime Minister, Liz Truss, her last, she's probably appeared more on camera than anyone else in the world during that time. The modern monarchy that she came to exemplify, you know, she even had a Twitter account, didn't she?
Yes, and actually, you mentioned Prime Ministers. We go Churchill, Eden, Macmillan, I might miss a few here, Sir Alec Douglas-Home, Harold Wilson, Edward Heath, James Callaghan, Margaret Thatcher, I mean, John Major. I mean, there's so many changes that this Queen saw. They were all Prime Ministers who served her, because it's her government, and the Prime Ministers who valued her counsel. The weekly audience they had with this elderly and international stateswoman was something that each one of those 15 Prime Ministers welcomed, and the most recent audience was with Liz Truss, her 15th Prime Minister. Yes,
it is remarkable, isn't it? We were looking at the aerial view of Buckingham Palace just a few moments ago, with the Royal Footman putting out the statement on the railings of Buckingham Palace, as is traditional, as you so rightly say, Chris, of any significant news. And there it is, the statement announcing the death of Queen Elizabeth II. And it reads as follows: "The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow." So that on the railings of Buckingham Palace as we speak, and many people starting to gather there. And there was that rather wonderful picture of a rainbow over Windsor Castle a little bit earlier this evening, and we are told there was a double rainbow over Buckingham Palace just a few minutes ago, as those clouds parted just after the news was released by the royal household. I think we'll see pictures of that, all in due course, Chris. But the new monarch, the King, and the Queen Consort then return to London tomorrow.
Yes, I think the late announcement from Buckingham Palace this afternoon of the Queen's passing means that a lot of the events that might have otherwise happened today will now move into tomorrow. And there is an 11 or 12 day period now in which a sequence of events will fall into place. It will involve the Queen remaining in Scotland, possibly for 4 or 5 days before the coffin is brought down to London. There is also a lying in state, which ordinarily happens at the Palace of Westminster, in the Great Hall of the Palace of Westminster. And Mary, you might remember that when the Queen Mother died, there was an enormously long queue of people waiting to file past that coffin.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of flowers already turning up at Windsor for an announcement that was made, just minutes ago. So I think this is a moment that the country will pause and reflect, but it will take a very long time, I think, for it to sink in that the Queen, this constant figure for 7 decades, is no longer with us.
Yes, it is an extraordinary thought, isn't it? And we're told that crowds broke out into the national anthem outside Buckingham Palace, and many of them were weeping as the flag was lowered to half-mast. That's the Union flag, isn't it? Not the Royal Standard, because that would have been at Balmoral, I'm
right.
guessing.
The Royal Standard can never fly at half-mast because there is always a monarch, and the very moment that the Queen passed, then Prince Charles became king, and it will be his standard, the Royal Standard in Scotland, as I believe, which will now fly above Balmoral Castle, where he, the King, is in residence. At all other royal residences, as we just saw at Buckingham Palace, as we saw at Windsor Castle a short while ago, the Union flag will fly at half-mast. And you're looking here at pictures of the state opening of Parliament, which the Prince, as he was, the King as he now is, had to do on behalf of his mother recently. Well, now, of course, the state opening of Parliament, when it happens next, will be opened by the King and the Queen consort. And as I just said, I think it will take a very long time for this kind of news, for the changes that we are seeing to sink in. The stamps, the money, and all that might change in due course. But this is a significant moment in the life of our country.
So we will never see the Queen's Royal Standard again?
I mean, there will be a Royal Standard in Scotland draped over her coffin. So when the staff at Balmoral pay their respects to the Queen, the coffin will be placed in the ballroom. Her coffin will be draped in the Royal Standard in Scotland, but it will never fly from a flagpole again.
Extraordinary, isn't it? The Lord Speaker of the House of Lords, Lord McFall, has said following the death of the Queen, the nation and the whole Commonwealth is united in deep mourning. He says, on behalf of the House of Lords, I extend our thoughts and prayers, first and foremost, to His Majesty the King and the other members of her family. Her Majesty's supreme dedication to public service is unparalleled, and her legacy will be eternal. Today, he says, the nation should reflect on the service she gave to the Crown and to her people and give thanks. And that's the statement from the Lord Speaker of the House of Lords there. And I think that sums up, doesn't it, very, very well, I think, what many will be thinking.
I think, yeah, many people will be thinking exactly that, and we wait for the Prime Minister to express her thoughts, her condolences on behalf of the nation. A huge job for the new Prime Minister in order to get the tone right and pay the right kind of respects to the Queen. And it was always about the future generations. If you're just looking at the balcony pictures there, it's where you can see Prince George himself, a future king. Elevated, of course, today to slightly closer to the throne than he was at the start of the day. He actually started in a new school today with his sister and younger brother, and it was always about the king and her future heirs. And we're talking about the longevity of the Queen, and there where we are. President Kennedy, President Reagan, famously when they went riding horses at Windsor. I mean, there were so many presidents that the Queen met as well. I think she met 14 of the 15 US
meeting
presidents.
Gorbachev there, of course, just died himself.
Yeah.
She was living history, wasn't she, during her 96 years,
Yeah, absolutely. And from 1952 to this year, there we are with Nelson Mandela. I mean, just, a queen on the world stage, someone keen to affect change. Yes, she had no political power, but her very presence, her convening power, was to bring people together, to invite Nelson Mandela, for example, here to go travelling in the Eastern Bloc after the fall of the Berlin Wall. All of these things the Queen did, inviting American presidents to Buckingham Palace. Even presidents who are slightly more controversial, like Donald Trump or leaders of other countries. She knew the power she had by just getting those those leaders together.
Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has just tweeted. He says it's with the heaviest of hearts that we learned the passing of Canada's longest reigning sovereign, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. She was a constant presence in our lives, and her service to Canadians will forever remain an important part of our country's history. And he famously said that he remembered her when he was a baby.
Exactly, Mary, and I'm just interrupting you because we just had a statement from His Majesty the Queen. I should read it to you. It's literally just been issued by Buckingham Palace. So it's from His Majesty the King. It reads this: "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family." He goes on, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth by countless people around the world." And the King concludes, "During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." And it's dated Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022. A statement from His Majesty the Queen, a statement from His Majesty the King. You can see that even those of us who have followed this for a long time can still make those mistakes. His Majesty the Queen.
The King.
His Majesty the King has just issued that statement on behalf of Buckingham Palace.
Yes, it is
as difficult as it might be to roll off the tongue.
We will get used to it, won't we, I guess. But he has been preparing for this job his entire life, hasn't he?
He has, and, you know, I think a lot of people say that he will be a better king for the preparations that he's made throughout his time as the heir to the throne and officially the Prince of Wales after he was invested with that title in 1969. The pictures you just saw there was the king supporting the Queen at the G7 summit not that long ago. But and here is the person we used to know as the Prince of Wales, and now His Majesty the King with the Queen consort in the House of Lords in the state opening of Parliament in May.
More world leaders are issuing revealing their sadness. Volodymyr Zelensky from Ukraine says it's with deep sadness that we learned the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. On behalf of the people, we extend sincere condolences. And Michelle O'Neill, Sinn Féin Vice President, Northern Ireland, of course, said she'd learned of the death of the Queen with deep regret. And the Queen, of course, famously went to build bridges in Northern Ireland and wore green and put the hand of
shook
friendship
hands with Martin McGuinness, exactly. And you know, the fact we have a statement from Sinn Féin just, you know, I think articulates the respect with which the Queen was held right across the political spectrum and right across the world.
Yes, it is remarkable, and we are expecting any moment a statement from Liz Truss. And you can see the lectern, the famous lectern out there. It's been dodging the rain showers for the last few days. And here she comes, the Prime Minister.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her